Another area that I'd like to talk about is demography, and there's whole courses on demography. We have several professions that rely on demography, um, and I'm just going to give you uh, a uh, a brief overview. But when I talk about the professions that rely on demography, we talk about actuaries, and as you know, actuaries work for insurance companies and they look at probabilities of diseases, accidents, and whatnot, and that's often how your insurance rates are determined. Uh, Plus the fact that there's got to be some profit that goes along with it too, because they're employing a workforce to keep track of all these particular diseases or problems or accidents. Accidents is really the wrong word because we talk about injury, okay, and we know that the greatest cause of mortality is injury from automobiles from age 1 to 44 years of age. Okay, so the point here is that this information can be applied in any number of ways, and actuaries are very valuable to us, and so is demography. And we're only going to look at the topic though briefly, and that's the point I'm trying to get across to you. So really, demography has to do with the shape of the population, but it's a study of populations with reference to the following: population size. Now, notice what we're looking at. Right away, we begin to get into demographic factors and gender and growth. Is the population growing, expanding? We have certain areas of the country where that goes on. Um, More growth than anything else. If you look around, there's something new being built in every city that you approach, and that's because the population clock tells us that we continue to get larger as a country. And then we look at age and distribution and vital statistics, and you know all these terms now. You know about distribution and vital statistics. But the greatest influence on population is mortality, fertility, okay? That's the number of children that are born, and we said it went from 2.1 to 1.9 in the US, in migration, and we have people that are fighting to get into the United States routinely, and they come from every border that we have. All around the U.S. are people trying to enter either legally or according to other means. So um, um, now we noticed just a side point that a study was done right after 9/11, and for 3 months people flew less, and infectious disease was significantly down in comparison to prior years during the same time frame. So we know that migration is a significant factor that has to do not only with the size of the population, but also with the number of new diseases that come into our country. So we have new strains all the time, and we have a strain of TB that's emerged in India that is resistant to all known antibiotics. So we've got a problem there. But I don't want to get too far afield on that. I'm just trying to give you an idea of what demography covers, some of the variables that they're interested in, and then which influences population growth the most. Okay? Now, when we look at demography, the variables that are looked at most often are age and gender. Okay, these are factors that we study and look at, and determine their influence or effect. And we have populations that often have different age and gender distributions. For example, if you look at West Lafayette, Indiana, we have a different age and gender distribution than Lafayette, Indiana, or any other community that is not a college town. And we have a different distribution when we look at retirement communities. If you go down to St. Petersburg, Florida, for example, and I'm not picking on them and I'm not making any value judgment about any of this, I'm just reporting information to you, that they have a different age and gender distribution. And I want to share that with you and talk about that. Now, we talked about these different distributions when we did SMR direct and indirect. And these are concepts that we just have discussed before, and that's why we make these adjustments, because from demography, we know that every city doesn't have the same distribution in terms of age and gender. Now, when we look at in older community, we recognize, I think it's after age 55, I believe that's correct, that we begin to have, that's the first time that we have more women than men, and that continues. So that changes the distribution. Okay, now, if I was going to ask you to look at this, what type of community is this based on just your perception and your review of this? You can see that we have two divisions. We've got age, right? And then we have gender. And by looking at it, what kind of community do you think this might be? And does it remind you of any particular community that you know of? Well, this is obviously a college community, and this would probably remind you of Purdue. I think the distribution, and I'm not positive, but I think it's 60-40 still in terms of men and women. It's not quite equal yet. So what are the main variables selected for distribution? You would say age and gender, right? And what do the data indicate? That there are more males between 20 and 24 than females. And near the apex up here, there are more females than males. And 35 to right in here, you see that there are more females than males. And people ask and speculate why, and some of that is men being killed in war, risky jobs, hereditary diseases, etc. Said differently, men are killed due to unintentional injuries, and for other reasons, as the slide indicated that I showed earlier. Research still shows that men are more willing to take risks than women, and it affects life expectancy. And there's other factors that affect life expectancy and longevity as well, but we won't go into this. But my primary point, what is it? That it's divided by age and sex. This is a distribution of a college community. Okay, that's really what I want you to get. Now, these are the distributions of our country early on, and I just want to go through them with you rather quickly here. So when we look at the first one, we have a very large base, you can see, and so we have a lot of young people, and then toward the top of the pyramid we have it it it's much smaller than the base. So we have a lot of people that are dying at a regular rate throughout the years listed here, and this often represents um, um, developing countries. They seem to have this kind of problem because they don't have all the advantages that we have in terms of wellness and medicine that would have an influence on their health. And you could, I think you would be reasonably safe in saying that this is how China looks today. So, because there's still restrictions in terms of the number of children and etc. Now, when we come to the 1940s, you can see that the birth cohorts of 1930 through 39, when we went through the Great Depression, we had these people here that are now take up this area. And the Great Depression produced relatively few children. And we talked about earlier, as I remember, that how economics has an effect on the number of children born. And when we go through bad economic periods, there's a decline. Now this is becoming more like a cylinder. It's not quite, and it's not demonstrated that way yet. But that would mean for every two, every two parents that die, that there would be two children per family. So that would be a replacement model. The children would be replacing the parents. Now let's go to the next one. Now we take the Depression children here, and now 20 to 29 years old, and these children now having a lot of babies. Um, because this is the 1960s. And if you remember, the 1960s were a pretty pleasant period. We had wash machines, and we had a whole lot of appliances, and television, I think, was invented in 1947, and most everybody had a television, a radio, and life was really pretty good. It was Leave It to Beaver, if you remember that show, and the Nelsons. I mean, it was the economy was a good one. So now let's go on to the 1980s and see what was happening there. We had a baby boom, okay, and you see this baby boom that went on, and they talked about the 1980s as the me generation. And so they were really more interested in economic goods and benefiting themselves, and so it was followed by a baby bust. Now, you notice at the top of each one of these distributions, we have more women than men. And this is a trend that's gone on. I don't know whether I pointed that out in the last one or not, but yes, it's occurring here, and yes, it's occurring here even in the 1940s. And definitely in 2000, it is happening as well. So what is the implication if we know that there are more elderly all the time? And we were really worried about Social Security and whether we would have, because there were so many baby boomers, and we wondered whether the current number of children who would be employed would be able to support this group. Actually, this group should have supported itself, and did. Money was taken out of the Social Security fund, so it should have never been an issue. But nevertheless, I'm going to give you a real estate tip here. The implication is for a ranch-style house. It doesn't have any steps or anything of that nature, so elderly people can get around easier. But this is what we're seeing in terms of the distribution. And so, um, so at any rate, I want to go through this distribution, and now we're dividing it between more developed and less developed countries. And which is a replacement model? Well, 2025 is a replacement model. We almost have a perfect cylinder. But notice, in 2025, we still have more females than males at the top of the apex. And women in underdeveloped countries only outlive men by 3 years, whereas in developed countries, women outlive men by 8 years. As the world wealth shift, this trend may change dramatically. So, as I mentioned, the world population may be affected more, and we may see wealth have an influence on these countries similar to those in developed countries. And people say, well, give me an example of a developed country. Well, there's many countries in Europe that would be developed countries. And less developed countries, we would probably talk about certain parts of Malaysia and Africa. So that's will give you some idea. I want to talk about Afghanistan, and this is you can see when this data was derived and being reported, and look at this distribution. As I remember, the longevity is about 40 to 45 years of age. So if you're in your 20s, you'd be middle-aged now. But you can see that the pyramid is such that it looks like very much a developing country, also influenced by war. But these data come to us as, October 19th, 2012. So we think everybody in the world lives a long time. That's not the case, and especially in less developed countries, we can point to you and show that many people do not live past their 40s. So this is a serious issue which would fall under the World Health Organization, and this might be of concern as well as population growth, and how can we grow in a systematic way so that the world can survive. But this again looks like America in the 1900s. So what is this? We're talking about 2013. We're talking about 113 years difference in terms of development, in terms of population growth and change. Okay, here's a distribution for China, and I thought this might be of interest to you. And this is a current view. And beginning to rapidly take the shape of a pyramid now. Shows a clear bias toward more males and females in the last 3 decades when the one baby law was invoked. Second babies if girls were killed. The one-child policy in China was put into effect in the 1980s. Throughout history, China has always been an agricultural country. People made their living through farming, and therefore the belief more children, more labor became popular. Since men have always been regarded as having more strength than women, boys have been much preferred over girls. There were many families, especially in countrysides, who kept conceiving children until finally they got a boy. Such beliefs add immensely to population growth. The government believed that controlling the population could increase the average national resources for every person, so that's why they implemented these policies. Um, and the policy was implemented very strictly from 1980 to 2000. Um, so, in talking with one of my Chinese students that's now graduated and gone on to another American school in our country, she verifies all of this. Um, there's just a whole lot of information about the policies and the influence on the shape of this particular distribution. So policy is one way. Our laws, policies, and laws together are one way to really control the shape of a population distribution and fall under the category of demography. Um, let's see. Our next slide has to do with the United States, and you can see our distribution, and it's not quite a cylinder either. And our population growth, our longevity hasn't increased a great deal, and I'll show you that later, in comparison to other developed countries. But this will give you some idea, and it'll also show you when there are more women than men as you go up the ladder, and you can make your own decisions about that and see just by examining each one of these bars. So but we're definitely progressing toward a cylinder, our replacement model, but we're small in comparison to China. I think we have the third largest population of the countries in the world. China far exceeds the number of people that we have. Women outnumber men beginning at ages 55 through 59. Starts right there, and the trend continues throughout the remainder of the years. I want to show you, this is another type of distribution, and it's applied to something else other than population growth. We look at motor vehicle trauma cases, and the conclusion about the top figure: more trauma for women than men as population ages, but there are more women. And it doesn't take into account the number of men who have already died, which is the Neiman bias, and I'll talk about that later on. But you can see what happens in terms of motor vehicle trauma. And this is probably something that some of you have experienced already and have noted and seen, and we see where the greatest number of injuries occur in what age group. Motor vehicle trauma cases resulting in death or hospitalization, and you can see in the second figure that this happens far more among men because they're risk takers, and we have going on in operating a motor vehicle. We have a lot more distractions. We've done studies with teenagers, and we find the use of mobile phones and texting, and the number of the people in the car leads to distractions, and when you couple all this with what a car symbolizes, that we have, as a result, we have far more deaths among males. And men work in risky occupations. They volunteer for war, as we talked about. And as mentioned before, more women are taking similar occupational positions. Like I was in Chicago and saw a construction engineer who was a female walking on a high beam above the ground on new construction, and it just made me absolutely nervous. Um, but anyway, what we don't want to do is generate stereotypes here. We want to look at data and have data tell a story and not jump to preconceived notions. Oftentimes, the hypotheses we start with in research are never confirmed. They're far different than what we thought. For example, we used to think that the number one interest would be health, that people would really be interested in health. That's not the case at all. It's about fourth or fifth on the list. They're interested in other things rather than health. Um, Next, I'd like to address the sex ratio. And we know it as a ratio, obviously, because we have two distinct categories, males and females. In the numerator are males, and in the denominator are females, and it's multiplied by 100. Now, notice this isn't 100%. This is a 10 to the nth. So let's talk about example 1 here. If you have 200 males and 190 females, the sex ratio in this case is 105 is 105. A score above 100 means that there are more males than females in the population, and a score under 100 means there are more females than males in the population. So again, it's reported as a whole number, and I'll want to address a table with you just to talk about it. Now, I've already covered this example with you, so you know a number again that 100 is a null hypothesis, equal number of males and females, and a number under 100 equals more females than males. Okay. In this next graphic, I'd like to start out with data that we see about the world in more developed regions and less developed regions. As you note, and this is true, and it's only slightly so, but there are more males born than females, and it's shown up in the world in more developed regions and less developed regions. And what occurs, as you see, as the population gets older, that there are more females than there are males. And if you look at the world population, you can see that right across. And we talked about it before, that it began in the middle to late 50s, and this also demonstrates that. Now, if you look at more developed regions, and we talked about Great Britain and Europe and those many of those countries, and we would be one of them as well, you see that we have more females than males, and that's occurred consistently in 1950, 2005, and the projection for 2050 is no different. And you can see what the distribution is for more developed countries, very similar, and in fact it might be even slightly lower. Now it's interesting, in less developed regions of the world, we have more females too, and that the number of females is not as low, and this may be the impact of the fact that generally just more people are dying all the time, and the ratio of men to women is not as dramatic because of the higher death rates amongst people in less developed regions. So that's how you use the sex ratio. And we look at this all the time. We look to see where there's changing. This would indicate that if you're a woman, the likelihood of living alone in later years is pretty great. Um, and you can especially see that based on these projections. So where should you live? And this is more tongue-in-cheek than anything else, and it's from a possible female perspective. If a female would like to live near more males, they should move to less developed countries. If they want to live near fewer males, they would move to more developed countries. And as I say, this is tongue-in-cheek, but it just gives you an idea about a conclusion that, depending on your perspective and history, that you might draw from the data. If males would like to live near more females, they should move to more developed countries. If they want to live near fewer females, they should move to less developed countries. And so you can be thinking about that and see whether that's one of your objectives or not. Sex specific death rate, you can see that we're dealing with a rate because we're dealing with the total of female in the population over the number of deaths of females, and we're doing the same with males, and it's multiplied by 100 as well. Um, um, this provides different information about gender survivability in relationship to the same sex. And I want to show you this data here in just a minute so you understand the graphic of it. Okay, so life expectancy. Um, Life expectancy is the average number of years a person is expected to live. Now, they claim that the human body is designed to live about 120 years, according to research. Now, in biblical times, they talked about people living 1,000 years. So I don't know whether the metrics were the same or not. But we can calculate life expectancy for any age, and we can calculate life expectancy at birth, which refers to the average number of years a newborn baby is most likely to live if current mortality trends persist. Life expectancy at birth is usually greater in more developed countries where infant mortality rates are lower. This is because of a better medical system, better medical care, etc. Now, again, we should be top in this area, but we are not. And I'm going to talk to you about life expectancy too, so comparatively in relationship to other countries, so you can see for yourself. Now, this is a graphic that we got from the U.S. Department of Commerce, and you can see what they're projecting for life expectancy for females and males. And by 2050, they expect the median to be 84.3 years of age for females, and for males 79.7 years. Now, you can see that it's increasing. We've done, from the 1900s, obviously, people didn't live very long. And we've made dramatic improvements as time has gone along, and most of our formulas regarding life expectancy were developed in the 50s and 60s. But we began to make progress, and it's increased every decade since. But and is added different social issues that we have to consider with an aging population, and you may have to consider as you age. And And for example, long-term care insurance, whether you'll take that or not, because you may find yourself in a senior's residence home and need extra care if you survive your spouse. And of course, the longer you wait in order to get it, if you can afford it, it costs more. So that's one of the issues. Um, Now, life expectancy at a given age, the average number of additional years a person of age X is likely to live if current mortality trends persist. Um, and life expectancy is really an indicator of a country's wealth and health conditions. So, um, but again, other countries are outdoing us, and we have remained the same. It's not that um, that we're doing worse. We just haven't made the progress that had been expected in terms of life expectancy. Sorry, years of life lost. This is another formula that you hear about in the literature, and I think it's an interesting way to conceptualize things and life, and it has to do with life expectancy at a given age can help you determine potential years of life lost. Now, this formula was developed again in the 50s and 60s, where the lifespan of an individual was about 65 years. And so if you have a person who dies at 20, what what they would do is just simply subtract 65 from 20, and the years of life lost would be 45. Um, you can see that it was a statistic that was excellent to use with infants, but not with elderly people. And, we have people that live beyond 65, and let's say they die at 70, well, this formula wouldn't apply. Well, what they've done is they've made adjustments in the formula to compensate for the population that they're working with. So that is done and seen. Okay, this is a life expectancy table at any given age, and you can see across the board the life expectancy at between 17 and 18 is 61.9. Now, that means that you add the 61.9 to the 17 or 18, okay? And that'll give you the total years they would live. And if you go through, you can see that um, you follow the same method of calculating length of life or life expectancy for each one of these. So as you get older, you expect that you're going to have fewer years to live. Now, the table continues, and we talk about at age 65 and 66 that you have the chance to become a teenager. So if you make it to 65, this is how it's said, that you will potentially have on median about 18.8 years to live past 65. So that's why the phrase is used, oh, somebody gets the opportunity to become a teenager. And this is how insurance companies set life insurance, because they think you're going to live till 84 or 85, and then they usually drop coverage after that age because they know there's too great a certainty of having to pay off the policy. So you can see that the 66 plus the 18.8 is 84.8, and if you make it to 80, for example, where's 80? You're going to have another 8.9 years, so you'll live to be 89.5. If you make it to 86, you have another 6.4 years, or you'll be 92. If you happen to reach 90, you can expect another 4.5 years and or another 4.8 years, excuse me, and you'd expect to live to 94.8. So probability declines in later years about the number of additional years you will live. So knowing this information, I think, is very helpful in terms of those of you who are goal setters and really want to plan the rest of your life. Depending on your beliefs and whatnot, you might want to change behaviors or do things differently, knowing that on median you have this many years left if you make it to 65. So, for example, you might want to spend more time traveling. You want to spend more time with the grandchildren, etc. Downsize your home, buy a ranch-style house. I'm just giving you some ideas. And then you can see for 100 and over what you can expect is a very short time frame that they're expecting you to live. Now, when we talk about median, there's great variation. So we might have a person that makes it to 65 or 66 that will live 25 years. But this is the median value that you can expect. So you can think, well, I have a pretty good chance if I make it to 65 to at least live another 20 years. Maybe I'll make it to 85. So that's what our tables are good for planning and maybe intervention purposes and the protection of health and things of that nature. Now, I want to show you. I was going to ask you to guess this, and what you note in looking at this figure very carefully is the first thing that worldwide, clearly, females outlive men in the countries displayed in this figure, and that's the first thing that you will note. Another fact is that other countries are making greater strides in the area of longevity, while America loses ground or remains the same. American women live 5.2 years longer than American men. That's another thing we note. And we see where we are. I want to show you here where Americans, here's United States, okay? And you can see how far from the top we are. We're the richest nation in gross national product. I think it's gross national product of all time. And so with that noted, we would expect then, I'm assuming that you heard me, that we are the richest nation in gross national product of all time in all of history. Then if that's the case, you would think that we would be at the top of this table. Now, I want you to notice the other countries that are above us. Chile, which is, and look where Cuba is. Cuba's not far behind. Costa Rica, Ireland, you can go right up, and often the Scandinavian countries do quite well. Now, you can see it all the way through. And the people who live still retain the top position are the Japanese. Now it's interesting that when the Japanese moved to Hawaii or California, their life expectancy becomes similar to ours, and that's fascinating. And just we've always thought that maybe it's related to our diet, and jokingly it's been said that the easiest way to conquer the world and take over another country would be to export our fast food, because we think we have a high fat diet, as you saw before, and there's and very unhealthy for us, and we don't eat enough fruits and vegetables or foods that are quality foods and have less calories. Now, um, interestingly, um, Canadians live longer than we do, and as I mentioned, the Japanese live the longest. And if you go down this list, we are 27th. We are 27th. We're nowhere near close to one. So, um, so again, we are the richest country in the world in terms of gross national income, and seventh in terms of gross national product. We don't produce and export much anymore. We're a service nation. But even with that information that I've just provided you, we would expect our longevity to be higher because of our wealth. We would expect that more of the population would receive health care and that we would live longer than what we do. So I just think this data is extremely interesting, and hopefully it'll be helpful to you and useful to you in terms of your own planning. Now, demographic information for every city in America is available through this website, and I encourage you um, to go to that website and type in your city, and I think it'll be very interesting and a lot of fun for you to see. You know, you might go to your birthplace, or you might go to your current residence, or you might go to where you grew up, or where your grandparents live, or whatnot. But it'll provide you with many insights that we don't have time to cover here.